Hi, my name's Ryan Hoover. I'm the director of Handgun Hunters International, and we're going to be going over this really interesting gun, the Ordnance Technologies SSP-91, better known as the Magnum Research Lone Eagle. In front of me here, I have the Ordnance Technologies SSP-91 pistol, also branded as the Magnum Research Lone Eagle. This is a cannon breech single-shot handgun that fired rifle cartridges. It was chambered in a variety of cartridges, including .22 Hornet, .223, 7.62 39, 30-30, 358 Winchester, 444 Marlin, 308 Winchester, and this gun is unique in that it has a very short overall length. The barrel is 14 inches, and so including the breech, the gun is still only a little over 15 inches long. Most single-shot handguns have the reputation of being forward heavy, but this gun is rearward heavy. The interesting thing about this is that you have to manually cock the trigger every time you want to fire it, which is handy because you can leave it loaded and safe. It also has a crossbolt safety on it that you can use. So I'm going to be going over the internal workings of this gun in a little bit, but just a little bit of history about this type of gun. In the early to mid 80s, a company called Ordnance Technologies came out with a pistol called the SSP-86. The 86 was very similar to this gun with a few modifications, or pre-modifications rather. This gun, as you see it now, the SSP-91, was revamped in the early 90s into its current state. In about mid-90s, I believe it was, Magnum Research branded this gun under license with Ordnance Technologies, and they called it the Lone Eagle to comport with their line of Eagle pistols, the Desert Eagle, the Baby Eagle, etc. This gun was offered by Magnum Research until about 2000 when it was discontinued, around the time when I always say a lot of handgun hunting kind of just fell off. But fortunately, there are a lot of these guns going around, and they are a very interesting piece of handgun hunting lore for sure. One thing I do want to talk about with the SSP-91, the 86, the Lone Eagle, etc., is that you must never dry fire these guns. Dry firing will break the firing pin, sure as you can count. And so do not ever fire this gun without a snap cap in place to cushion the firing pin's fall. This gun happens to already have a broken firing pin, and as of the time of this filming, May 2023, Magnum Research does still have some firing pins that they'll sell for 20 bucks a piece plus $5 shipping. So we're going to be replacing the firing pin in this gun, but for now, we will be just using it as a demonstration piece. Okay, this particular gun is chambered in .223, and I'm going to go over the manual of arms for the Magnum Research Lone Eagle. Okay, I've switched it around to be more conducive to my right-handedness. If you were at the bench, this is how it would work. I have an empty case, .223, to use for demonstration purposes. So you would first open the breech by rotating it clockwise until you can see the chamber. Then you're going to take your round and you will insert it into the chamber. You would close your breech by turning it counterclockwise. Then you would pull back on the cocking piece on the left side, forward on the fore end, and it would cock the hammer. Then you are ready to go. It does have a crossbolt safety that you can push in and out to take the safety on or off, and you would be ready to go. After you fire the gun, you rotate the breech clockwise, and you can open it, and then when you go the rest of the way and it clicks, it will eject the spent case, or if you have an unfired round in there as well. It's a really interesting design. Let's try that again. Okay, so you're at the range. You're going to fire the gun. You want to rotate it to clockwise. Then insert your round, in my case, just an empty case. Then close the breech by rotating it counterclockwise. It's a little difficult with an empty case. Now cock the gun by pulling back on the lever on the front left side of the gun. Now that it's cocked, you can put the gun on safety. Then take the safety off when you're ready to fire and fire the gun. When you're finished, rotate the breech clockwise, open it till you see the chamber, then go a little past it and you will eject the spent case or the unfired round. And then you're ready to go again. Okay, I'm out here on the range with the Magnum Research Lone Eagle and 223. Got some of this PMC ammunition. I've had it for a long time. We're gonna see how it does. I have the chronograph set up. I have some targets down there. I'm just gonna kind of shoot for a few minutes and see how she goes. So I have the gun on the rest and I'm going to, and it's open right now. I can see down the bore and I will not be shooting my chronograph. So I have a 223 round here, stick it in the back and then rotate the breech closed by going counterclockwise. One thing that I'm not a big fan of on this gun is that you can't put it on safety until you cock the gun. So be sure that as soon as you cock the gun, you put the safety on, which is on the left side of the gun. And then when I get set up, I'll take the safety off before I fire. So here we go. Quite a long trigger pull, which is to be expected for this kind of gun. You just have to get used to it. A good gunsmith probably could do something about it. The safety is off because I can't put it back on after I fired it, but I've started opening the breech here, and when I open the breech the rest of the way, you can see that the fired case will eject, and that's a pretty cool feature of it. You know, there are a lot of negatives about this gun, but there are some positives as well. One is how strong it is. Two is how cool it is. I mean, I mentioned that I came up with these guns and seeing them in magazines and seeing what was going on with Magnum Research, and it is just kind of a childhood fantasy to be able to sit here being able to fire one of these guns. Now, I don't have one. I've never fired one in a big, heavy recoiling caliber, but this is a really cool gun and it's a really good starter. And let's go ahead and do another one. I've been getting, with this 55 grain ammo, I've been getting probably around 2,800 feet per second out of this 14-inch barrel. With this 50 grain ammo American Eagle, I was getting close to 3,000, 29 something. And so, you know, to me, that's just further evidence of the effectiveness of these short barreled pistols. I mean, compared to a rifle length, that they could still, these pistols can still definitely be effective. Okay, so I left this part in just to show how long it takes me to pull this trigger. A lot of you know I've been working through some target panic and flinching and stuff, and so I'm trying to apply even continually increasing pressure to this trigger, and it just takes forever to go off. It's something you can get used to, but that's probably why I look surprised when it does go off. Man, that trigger takes a long time to pull, but still, it's a really fun gun. Open her up, eject it. Couple of things that I really like about this gun. First of all, as a I'm as old as millennials get, and when I got into hunting handguns, this was one of the ones that was widely available. Another thing I like about this gun is the fact that it's pretty durable and very strong. The action is incredibly strong. Another thing is the fact that you can look down the rear of the chamber and verify that your chamber is empty, and you can check the condition of your bore to a degree from the rear of the gun. I really think that the ejector mechanism is unique, and I also like how easy it is to disassemble. And we're going to move over to that process now. This is going to be a detailed disassembly of the Magnum Research Lone Eagle. I'm going to go through the ins and outs. This is a pretty easy pistol to disassemble, and we're going to go through it and so you can see exactly how it works and some of the ins and outs of this gun. All right, first we're going to start. You'll see you want to make sure that the gun is unloaded, obviously, so we can look very easily in the breech. This gun is definitely unloaded. We're going to take this Allen wrench and undo the screw on the right side of the stock, kind of a few inches forward of the breech. Just undo that screw and pull it out. It should be fairly simple. Okay, before you pull the barreled action from the stock, you're going to want to make sure that the gun is cocked, because, and I'll show you the reason for that as soon as we get this gun out of the stock here. All right, now that you have these two separated, you'll be able to see on the inside here, there's a spring-loaded rod that runs from the front of the stock all the way through the back, and it comes out the back side of the stock. This is what actuates the firing pin through the breech, and this needs to be pushed in, because if the gun were not cocked, I'm going to let the piece down, then you can see that it sticks out the back and it would be protruding and preventing the breech from being lifted out of the action. As I work this mechanism, you can see from the inside how it cocks and stays there, and then when you pull the trigger, how it fires the gun. Okay, let's take another look inside the stock. Okay, as you can see, we're looking down into the top of the stock. Now, this is the front section of the stock, and the lever that cocks the gun is here on our left. So basically, we're holding it like if we were pointing it with the action on the gun. So this is the cocking piece, and this right here running back through the length of the stock is the rod that goes out the back of the stock and allows the gun to be fired. So when you cock the gun on the inside, you can see that it pushes this cocking piece, which is under spring tension, forward. And then basically the sear is a little notch on this rod right here that the trigger engages. You can kind of see the trigger right here and that line going across, engaging that surface right there. So when you cock the gun, you can see that ledge coming up forward, and you can see the trigger popping into place. I'm going to let it go. I'm just going to rotate the gun so you can get a better sense of where we're at on the gun. Okay. So that's the trigger section, like that. And then you can see this being the trigger up against the sear section of this cocking rod, that if I were to pull the trigger, it would release it. That flies backwards under spring tension, hits the piece of the firing pin, and ignites the primer. Set that aside. That really doesn't need any further disassembly. There is a torsion spring at the front on the cocking piece that if it broke, you would be able to, you would have to pull the pin that runs through the top, or from the top to the bottom, or vice versa, of the stock here, and you'd be able to pull that out. The trigger is held in by a pin that goes from left to right on the stock as well, and that has its own spring. All right. The spring-loaded mechanism that fires the gun when you pull the trigger can be removed. There's an internal screw, but it's under pretty heavy spring tension, so I would recommend not disassembling that unless you had a good reason. Okay, moving on to the breech disassembly. Again, pretty simple. If you look at the rear of this breech, there are 3 screw holes. You have, starting at the top here, this is the screw hole to remove the firing block. This is the block on the back of the gun. And by the way, I'm just making up these names. I was a gunsmith for 15 years, and so they may be close, they may not be, but this is what I'm calling them. So I'll just call this the firing block here. You'll see a screw at the top of that. This screw hole on the right side of the gun is for the screw that actuates the ejector, and this screw hole on the left side of the gun, this screw is an anti-rotating screw. It prevents the breech from rotating too far in the counterclockwise direction. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do, or first thing you should know rather, is that each one of these screws is actually two screws. So you'll have to remove the first one, the top one first, and after you remove that, don't think that you're done because you'll have to take another screw off. So if I take that screw out, there's still another screw deep in that hole there that needs to be removed. Okay, now that I have the firing block screw off, I can remove the firing mechanism, or excuse me, the firing block. You do this by prying up on the little firing pin lever there and pushing up on it, and then it'll come out. Be careful because the firing pin is under spring tension and you don't want to lose it as this block comes out. It's not under spring tension like in 1911, but it is under some minor spring tension. So you can see I pull the firing pin block out, and then the firing pin can be removed like so. And there's a spring in the firing pin block like that. And then there is an extender piece on the bottom, and that is removed. Okay, I wanted to show you guys the firing mechanism. It consists of these parts. There's a rod down here that has a spring on it that goes through the bottom of the breech and sticks out the front of the bottom of the breech. And when you pull the trigger, the spring-loaded rod in the stock hits the back, travels through, that transfers its energy to this little button. And then on the firing block itself, there's this hinged block that rotates around that roll pin there. And so when it's in that position when it's not being fired, but when you fire it, the energy transfer goes through that bottom button. It strikes the bottom of that block. That block goes forward, hits the firing pin, transferring its energy to ignite the cartridge. Okay, the next part is we're going to take out the ejector actuator screw. And like so. And remember there's a second screw in the bottom there that you need to take out. Okay. Once you have that screw removed, you're going to take your other Allen wrench here and undo the breech block retaining screw. This is like a little stub screw that comes out. And then again, there is a second screw underneath it. Once that's done, you're ready to remove the breech. The breech can be removed easily by spinning it off counterclockwise, and you'll see some big old, they look like Acme or buttress threads on there, and you can separate the breech. This is a single piece from the rest of the block rather from the rest of the breech. And now that we're in there, you can see the way that the ejector works. So looking at the rear of the gun with the breech block off, you can see how the ejector mechanism works. There's a curved groove on the right side of the gun that the ejector actuator screw rides down, and it hits right there and will trip this little trigger with a sear on it, and that lets the ejector be fired, basically, firing the empty shell or whatever out of the chamber, and it's the breech itself that keeps the ejector from falling out. So you can see it pop out. To take it out, you just release this sear, pull the ejector assembly out, drop it. You can see it there. And then you'll have to fish out the spring, and you'll probably have to move the sear some more to get that spring out. This is what the spring looks like. Now looking at it again from the back, you can clearly see this is the curved groove that I'm talking about that the actuator screw rides down. And then you can really see really well how that sear mechanism works. The screw will hit that little tripped plate, and you can see the sear moving out of the way in the hole where the ejector is. And that's a pretty simple feature, but a pretty cool design on this gun. One thing you should know when you reassemble, that there are some similar looking screws that go in the back of the breech, but that they are different. Let's take a look at these 6 screws. So starting from the top left, you can see that there's the stub screw or the lock screw that goes on top of the breech screw or the anti-rotate screw. You can see the flat part on that. And then moving on, we have the set screw that goes over the firing block screw. Now the firing block screw has a little unthreaded nub at the bottom, and that is what holds the firing block in place when it's screwed all the way down. Moving on, we have another set screw. This set screw is identical to the firing pin block set screw, so those two are interchangeable. But what is not interchangeable is this screw right here. The ejector actuator screw also has an unthreaded stub at the bottom, and that is for hitting that sear trigger, the ejector sear trigger that I showed you just a little bit earlier. We're going to reassemble in the reverse order. Again, it's pretty simple. We're going to start with the ejector, so place the ejector spring on the little rod behind it and find where it goes just in the rear of the breech, like that. The sear for the ejector must be moved out of the way. But once you have it in there, you just need to push it down either by hand or you can use a tool to push that in. Now you want to put the little extender piece that fires the gun from the front of the breech in the gun underneath the ejector. This is a step that you could do after you have the breech block back on. It doesn't really matter. The next thing is to take the breech block and screw it back on. This is a reverse threaded system, so it goes on lefty-tighty. The next thing to do is to put in the ejector actuator screw. So we're going to put that one in. That is the longer screw with the little stub at the bottom. So when you do this, if you put it in too tight, you will bottom the screw out and you won't be able to rotate your breech, or you will make it difficult to rotate. So you want to bring it in until it's tight and then back it off maybe a quarter of a turn. Once you do that, you should be able to test it by rotating your breech until the ejector snaps like that, and you can make sure that it is functioning properly. Once you have it set to the correct depth, put the set screw on top of it, snug it down, and that screw will not come out. I want to say that it doesn't really matter which order, if you do the ejector screw side or the takedown anti-rotate screw side first, it doesn't matter. Putting in the takedown anti-rotate screw, you have to be careful because you can tighten this to the point where when the gun is unloaded, you can rotate the breech freely, but when you load the gun, this screw will bind on the rim of a cartridge. And this breech really shouldn't be any more difficult to rotate when it's loaded than when it's unloaded. So that's an adjustment you're going to need to make before you go to the range with a dummy cartridge, but I highly recommend you do that. Once you have that one in there and adjusted, we're going to move on. You take the lock screw, the stub screw, remove the hair from it, then put that in. Snug it all the way down. You don't want to go crazy with it, but you definitely want it to be tight so that these screws do not back out, because that's obviously something we don't want to do. You can see at the top the little counter board. That is where the screw that holds the firing block in place goes. Now we're going to put the little extender button on the bottom in place. That just slides in there. Press to make sure that it moves freely. Nothing's binding. Now we're going to take the spring for the firing pin. And we're going to, remember this firing pin is broken, so it's just for demonstration purposes. Put the spring over the firing pin, put the firing pin in its corresponding spot. Again, make sure that there's nothing binding there. Now the firing pin block goes in. You take it, make sure that it's oriented correctly, and place it about halfway up the breech and slide it in to the right so that you can get it in the dovetail. Press the little button on the bottom so it slides in, and slide it down to where it's in position. Then take the screw, remember this is the shorter screw with the little unthreaded stub on the bottom, and you want to screw that in. Now, unlike the other two screws that need adjustment to get them to be at the correct depth, this screw is one you want to tighten all the way down. Again, don't go too crazy because these are small screws, but you definitely want it to be tight because that counter bore you saw is what this screw goes into to hold the firing block in place. Then you take the lock screw that goes over that screw, screw it in. Remember, this screw is identical to the lock screw that goes over the ejector actuator screw, and you can screw that in until it's snug as well. After you do that, make sure that you rotate the breech to make sure that everything's working properly, that the ejector is working. I recommend using a dummy, which I didn't do here, just to make sure everything is good. Okay, at this point, the breech is reassembled and ready to be mounted back onto the stock. I would just make sure that before you do that, just make sure everything's working properly, that the ejector is firing like it's supposed to, that it's not firing when it's not supposed to, and that the breech is rotating only as far as it's supposed to go and no further, etc., etc. Do those checks before you put it back together. Okay. Now, as you can see, when we're going to reassemble it, this is a good time to look, and you can tell that if the gun is not cocked, if the cocking piece hasn't been pulled, then the spring-loaded rod will be sticking out the rear of the pistol stock and will bind with this little connector right here, or excuse me, this little rod right here, and you won't be able to insert them into the gun properly because this block, this soldered and dovetailed block, needs to fit into the stock right there. So we're going to cock the gun. And then as we put it in, we're going to tilt the back like so and push it forward, and then it should just kind of rock in. You might have to give it some squeezing. Okay. Then you can remount this screw. And it's reassembled. Okay, I'm just going to verify function with this empty case, load it into the chamber, fire the gun. It does not fire on safety, does not fire when you take it off of safety. It fires like that when it's off of safety. I'm going to open the breech. Looks good. Snap the ejector. Works good. Everything looks good. This gun is ready to go to the range. I hope you enjoyed this detailed disassembly of the Magnum Research Lone Eagle / Ordnance Technologies SSP-91. If you have any further questions regarding this gun, feel free to reach out to me, Ryan at Handgun Hunters International. Thank you all, and as always, good hunting.